people, one of our first life lessons is how to adapt ourselves for different situations. A preschool teacher may be bubbly and fun while helping kids learn their ABCs, but at home, she might listen to heavy metal and enjoy stomping around in mosh pits. We learn to hone our personalities for different locations and events so we can blend in more easily with our surroundings. Criminals and killers do the same thing. Ed Kemper found himself friends with many of the cops in his area, pulling suspicion off of him for his crimes. Dennis Rader was a family man who was active on his church council, while at the same time killing 10 people. Archibald Hall, like many of those before and after him, learned to blend in so well with his surroundings that he found himself employed as a butler for many of the finest British aristocratic families in the early 1970s, leading to his eventual name, the Monster Butler. Archibald Hall would eventually be convicted of killing 5 people in the span of a year. This is a brief history of Archibald Hall, the Monster Butler. As always, this episode of A Brief History contains graphic content and may not be suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Archibald Hall was born in Glasgow, Scotland in 1924, but not much is known about the man's childhood. Hall wasn't born into aristocracy or money, and instead had to fight for survival on the streets of Glasgow. It was just midway into his teens when Hall turned to crime for the first known time. Hall started out with a petty crime scam to earn some quick cash. It began with the young Hall creating 2 Red Cross collection tins, one intended for small change, which he would then donate to the Red Cross, and one for paper money, which Hall would keep for himself. The Red Cross scam was his first, but not nearly his last foray into the world of petty crimes, and his criminal behavior caught up with him rather quickly. Hall was eventually arrested and given a 10-year sentence for theft. While in prison, Hall spent less time on becoming rehabilitated and more time on perfecting his MO. During his decade-long sentence, Hall spent his time preparing himself for when he was finally released back into the world at large. He changed his speech patterns, dropped his Scottish accent, researched the ways of etiquette, and learned all about antiques. Once he was released from prison, Archibald Hall changed his name to Roy Fontaine, with inspiration from his favorite actress, Joan Fontaine. Hall found work as a butler and returned to Scotland. From 1941 until the mid-1970s, Hall spent more of his time in prison than outside of it for various thefts, many involving jewels, but he would always find more work as a butler when he got out. In 1977, Hall was released yet again from another prison stay, and upon release found work as a butler in the home of Lady Hudson, the widow of an MP. As most butlers did, Hall lived on the property with Widow Hudson, and was eventually visited by an old prison acquaintance, David Wright. Wright charmed the Lady Hudson and convinced her to hire him for odd jobs around the home. But then things around the house started to go missing. First some silver, and then one of Lady Hudson's rings. Hall was furious. He enjoyed his job with Lady Hudson and was hoping to curb his life of crime and settle into his life as a butler. Hall quickly found out that Wright's girlfriend was now in possession of the ring, and she was convinced to return it, which in turn angered Wright. Wright, taking advantage of the Lady Hudson being away, consumed several bottles of her finest champagne, gathered his courage and a rifle, and forced his way into Hall's bedroom. Belligerent and drunk, Wright fired a shot, which hit the headboard of Hall's bed. After what must have felt like an eternity, Hall talked down Wright and managed to get the drunkard to bed. Hall lay awake, furious at the theft and subsequent attempted murder, and hatched a plan for revenge. The following day, Hall and Wright gathered their rifles to go out hunting rabbits for that evening's meal. The men fired at several rabbits, though Hall allowed Wright to take point, eventually emptying his gun. Once Hall was sure that Wright was out of bullets, he pointed his rifle at Wright's head and shot him dead. Hall buried his friend in a ditch by the river and continued on his work for Lady Hudson. Sometime later, Lady Hudson was made aware of Hall's criminal past, and she released him from his position with her. Hall took his unemployment as an opportunity to move from Glasgow to London, and got another position as a butler, this time with ex-MP Walter Scott Elliot and his wife. The couple were wealthy on their own, but as they accumulated more wealth, they became interested in antiques and began collecting. Hall's plan was to work for the couple for a short time until he was able to rob them of valuable antiques and then retire to a quiet, non-criminal life. By this time, Hall had brought in criminal friend Michael Kiddo for assistance in the crime. One evening, while Kiddo and Hall were discussing their plans for the robbery, the wife of Walter Scott Elliot caught them. In a panic, Kiddo picked up a pillow and quickly suffocated the elderly woman, who was just demanding to know why a stranger was in her home. Knowing that they would eventually be found out by her husband, the pair, aided by sex worker Mary Coggle, decided he too had to go. The trio drugged the old man, loaded his wife's body into a car, and drove off for Scotland, where they buried the body of Mrs. Scott Elliot. Meanwhile, Mary Coggle stayed with the man and impersonated his wife. After burying the body, they returned to the estate and decided it would be best to also take care of Mr. Scott Elliot. They beat the old man to death with a spade and buried him in a shallow grave. After the death of the couple, Mary Coggle took to wearing Mrs. Scott Elliot's clothing, claiming it made her feel beautiful. But both Hall and Kiddo took issue with Coggle wearing the dead woman's clothes, citing that she was drawing too much attention to them and could become their demise if they didn't act quickly. Hall and Kiddo hit Coggle with a fire poker and suffocated her with a plastic bag. Coggle was then dumped under a bridge. After the deaths of the wealthy Scott Elliots and their partner Mary Coggle, the men stopped at a hideout in Cumberland, only to find out that Archibald Hall's half-brother Donald was already taking up residence there. Donald Hall had just been released from prison and had a criminal record similar to Archibald, with one glaring difference. Donald was a convicted child molester. Disgusted by his brother and his audacious crimes, Archibald knocked out his brother and drowned him in the bathtub. The pair then gathered the body into the car and drove around, searching for a location to dump the pedophile. But it had been snowing, and the ground was hard and frozen, so digging any suitable grave would have been near impossible. Unsure of what to do, Hall and Kiddo checked into the Blenheim House Hotel to gather themselves and figure out a plan of action. The owner of the hotel was immediately suspicious of the men and quietly called the police, asking them to check the registration on the car the pair had driven in with. The police checked out the car, and it was found that the plates had been switched and should have been on a different car entirely. Hall and Kiddo were both taken in for questioning regarding the issues with the registration. While being taken in, Hall escaped for a brief time but was almost immediately picked back up. Police also sent some of their own to search the car, and upon opening the trunk, they were met with the body of Donald Hall. At this point, Hall and Kiddo's lies began crumbling around them. The body of Mary Coggle was found. The disappearances of the Scott Elliots was being investigated, and Hall simply couldn't take it anymore. Despite his normal, seemingly calm composure, Hall broke down and confessed to everything, including the murder of David Wright years before. Kiddo was charged for 3 murders and was given life imprisonment with a 15-year minimum. Police stated later that Kiddo was lucky to have been caught because Hall would have killed him as well. Hall was convicted of 4 murders and was given life imprisonment with a recommendation from the judge that he never be released. Hall was eventually added to the list of dangerous prisoners who should serve the entirety of their life sentences. During his later time in prison, Hall requested the right to die and made multiple unsuccessful suicide attempts. Hall later died of a stroke in 2002 when he was 78 years old. Archibald Hall was a man who could have used his talents of blending in for good, but chose them to try and acquire wealth in quite the wrong way. In what ways do you alter your personality every day to blend in? How many different faces do you have to wear every day? Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of A Brief History. Thank you to my patrons who support this series, it is much appreciated. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime sim stories every Friday. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.